Well, today we're speaking with Rob Wolf, and the topic for today is big ticket items to look at inside the four walls of your DC. And my first question is, can you provide us with a brief background of yourself?
Sure, Dustin. Again, you said my name's Rob Wolf. I'm a supply chain professional. Been in the business for 30 plus years, and I went to school at Penn State University back in the 80s. There I am dating myself, but at that time they had a new major called business logistics, and it was one of only 8 colleges that offered a major in logistics. And so I graduated from Penn State, and even to this day, like I said, 30 plus years later, or about 30 years, I'm still practicing it. And the beauty of supply chain, it changes all the time. And, to give people the best example, because, when I talk out in the real world, I tell people I'm in the supply chain field, they look at me, what is that? And I mentioned to them, did you ever hear of Amazon? And I say that, half kiddingly, obviously. They say, oh, yes, of course. And I tell them, well, when you hit that buy button on the computer and your package is you're at your house in 2 days, that's supply chain. That's how much has changed in the last 30 years. So I've had I've been with some companies over the years, and throughout the years, those companies have offered me great education, and I've been able to, parlay that into, teaching other people what have you along the, things with supply chains. And one of the big things I've done the last year is educated myself a little further through APIX, and became a certified, supply chain professional and certified logistics, transportation, and distribution. And they taught me some really big things to look at in distribution centers and your logistics operations, which probably dovetails into the next thing you would like to talk about.
Oh yeah, so my next question is, can you talk about what are the biggest expenses inside a DC, and also why are these important to look at?
Sure. My wheelhouse is distribution. Even the supply chain is from like a raw material to a finished good. But distribution centers, for those listening out there that aren't too familiar with it, it's basically where your finished goods are stored, picked, packed, and processed, and shipped out to the customer. And the customer could be another wholesaler, retailer, or it's direct to a customer. But for the lack of the conversation, it's just really anything where the product is moved. And the biggest things that I've seen expenses are either transportation, which is a little bit outside the four walls, but we can touch on that a little bit, inventory, and your labor. Now, transportation's starting to take a little bit of a twist lately because of ELDs, electronic logging devices. And the federal government has made that mandatory as of this year for truckers to have that. And that comes back to logging books. It used to be that truckers had to, record their hours and what have you on a logging book. And sometimes there were mistakes, and so they wanted to make sure there was no margin of error. So they have a logging device which shows basically where that truck is at all times. And at first, the carriers and the drivers were thinking this is Big Brother. But what the trucking companies have done is they've used this to their advantage. And this is where the distribution center comes into play. And a lot of DCs probably don't realize this is happening to them. But when a truck comes up to get loaded at your dock, they'll give you a window. And if you exceed that window, they're going to charge you back with an accessorial charge. Now, when I was at a bigger company, there was a big box company that did this for truckload shipments. You had 2 hours to load it, and if you went past that, then they would charge you back. Now the LTL carriers are doing that. So that's one cost that people can start to look at it. And just make sure you're aware that it's your LTL carrier charging you extra if it takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes to load up an LTL carrier. Some of the other things that people overlook with transportation, and I mentioned it earlier, accessorial charges. A lot of people think that you negotiate with an LTL carrier that's a less than truckload carrier. So that's one pallet at a time, let's say. When you negotiate with a carrier, you negotiate a discount. You tell them the volume of your shipments, how many times you're shipping each day, and then they'll say, okay, well, we'll give you 20% off of the list price or whatever that number may be. But sometimes they don't tell you some of the extras that they have to do. And an extra would be if they get to the destination and the customer is off hours only. You have to have a lift gate. You have to have an inside delivery. There's special hours that they only receive. So watch out for these accessorial charges and make sure that you're getting one freight rate or one rate for an accessorial charge. That's the easiest way. Just charge me $50 each for an accessorial charge. But watch that on your freight bill. The other two big expenses are inventory and labor. Let's talk about labor. I don't mean to say that get rid of your labor, but there's a few avenues we can take. What I always look for when I go to a company is how long has your labor been there? If labor turnover rate in the warehouse is less than a year or two, that's probably a red flag. That the company might need to address that, whether that's with pay, whether that's with the benefits offering, or just the work environment itself. I'll digress a little bit. I always love telling this story. One of the companies I used to work for back in the Midwest, a very solid company, one of the gentlemen that worked for me, he's since retired, he retired about 4 or 5 years ago. He started with the company 2 months after Kennedy was assassinated. That's John F. Kennedy in 1963. So Red worked for the company for 52 years. And I had plenty of people working underneath me that were 40 plus years working for the customer. So that says a lot about the company. But getting back to the labor, if there's a lot of temporary labor, companies are looking to shave money. That may not be the best. It may cost you, the price may be a little bit upfront, but it's going to cost you in the long run because you're going to have to retrain people. But the other things to look at in labor is your labor in the right place? And what I mean by that is some companies have, let's say it's a one shift operation, 8 to 5. Well, maybe you can move the labor around to have split shifts or double shifts. So you have an 8 to 5 shift plus a noon to 8 shift to help, smooth out the process with the workflow. So, look at that, and also with your labor, make sure your people in the right areas that are skilled for that. And I'll touch on that a little bit later with some of the things with lean and waste and what have you. But always look at the labor. Can you get creative with the shifts? Another story I had, one of my last company I worked for, it was a 24/7 operation, and we had 12-hour shifts. So you had people working 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Well, what I discovered was, once we got this going, because we opened up a new DC, the one DC, which was a finished goods only, the truckers weren't coming at 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. They're always coming at 6 a.m. to about 6, 7 at night. So what we did is we had a combination. We had a 12-hour shifts to take care of the manufacturing process, because that never stopped the production lines. But then we also had 8-hour shifts, 6 and 2 to 10. So we were able to flex the labor around, and that helped a lot of people. They enjoyed that because the 6 to 2 and 2 to 10 people could be on a more quote normal schedule, so to say. And the last topic that you can look for inside the four walls of your DC is inventory. And the Japanese, they started lean manufacturing many years ago. Actually, they didn't start it. They adopted it from us after World War II, but that's another story for another day. But they perfected lean manufacturing, and to them, inventory is waste. Inventory is evil, however you want to look at it. And here in the States, a lot of companies have adopted that push mentality. Make the product first, then sell it. Well, that often creates a lot of problems, because the first and foremost is the company's invested the capital to make that product, and now it's sitting in your warehouse. And when it's sitting in your warehouse, it's carrying cost. It's costing the company money to carry that inventory. And carrying costs can be anywhere from 10 to 35% of the value of your inventory. So think about that. If you have inventory of $1 million, it could be costing you $350,000 a year just to carry that inventory. Now, what goes into carrying inventory? What are some of the costs involved with carrying inventory? Well, there's the rent or lease of your building. Are you leasing a building bigger than you need to? You have to carry insurance on the value of your property. So if you tell your insurance company, I've got $1 million worth of product, then they're going to price your insurance to recover $1 million. But if you can reduce that to $750,000, $800,000 worth of inventory, your cost will be less. And then there's the obsolescence factor, risk factor. The longer inventory sits, depending on your industry, the less value it has. The semiconductor electronics, the shelf life could be only 12 months. Other areas, it's longer, but you still run the risk of that becoming obsolete or damaged. So carrying costs is a big issue, to bring down. And, I always caution people with this also. If someone goes into a DC and they're new, don't start cutting inventory as soon as you walk through the door. You have to check with your purchasing and finance people because there's a ratio out there called the leverage ratio, and it's your liabilities to equity. And not to get into the weeds too much about that, but you want a healthy leverage ratio. And when you cut one of them out, say inventory, then you have to cut the other out, and that might create problems for that company. So always check with the purchasing and the finance people before you do something like that. The inventory also, it hides a lot of problems. And if you build inventory and just build it, you're really not getting down to, making the right product at the right time for the right customer. So again, make sure you try to adopt some pull strategies rather than just make the product and put it in the warehouse. And, look at your days of inventory and make small improvements. Days of inventory is basically, it's a fairly simple formula. It's what's the value of your inventory divided by your sales, your annual sales divided by the average inventory. So for our conversation, if you have $100 million in sales and your inventory is $1 million, on average, that's 100 days. Obviously, you want shorter days. That means you're getting paid quicker, your cash-to-cash cycle is better, and you're putting money in the pocket of the company quicker than if your inventory days are really, really long. Some of the other things that you can look at, and a lot of companies don't know this, but you could ask them, what is your DC costing the company? And a lot of people don't know that answer. And it's not a bad thing, but again, something to look at for a company, because a lot of companies view the DC as a cost of doing business, not as a value-added service. But to look at the cost of a company or a cost of the DC, a really broad paintbrush would be what are your DC costs? What is it costing you for the labor in there, all the material handling equipment, transportation, the equipment inside the lease of the building, and let's just say that is $5 million a year. Then you look at the orders. How many orders are you processing a day, and how many lines on each order are you processing each day? So if you're producing, let's just say, 50,000 lines a year, that's $100 a line. So at least that gives you a benchmark to see, okay, it's costing us $100 every time we process an order, one line. So if you have three lines on an order, that's $300 it's costing a company. So if you're only charging a customer $200, you're probably losing money on that order. And getting back to that analysis, one of the big ratios out there or theories is the 80-20 rule, Pareto analysis, that I learned that inventory, 20 to 30% of your inventory in your company is probably giving you 70% of your revenue. pay attention to 20 to 30%. You don't want to be overstocked or understocked of that. But then look at your other 60 to 70% of inventory. Half of that is probably giving you little to no profit, but the other half, 20 to 30%, is probably costing you. So look at that. The other, 80-20 rule is with your vendors and your suppliers and your customers. How many times have we heard that, there's some big box stores out there and they have a lot of control over these manufacturers, but they also give those manufacturers a good chunk of the profit to the company. Again, 20 to 30% of your customers probably are giving you 60 to 80% of your revenue. I'll close it out. Dustin, you were asking me earlier, what are some of the areas that you can look at to improve on these? I'm a big fan of the lean manufacturing. I'm certified black belt and green belt, and lean manufacturing. A lot of people think that eliminate. Well, that is true, eliminate, but it's eliminate waste, not people. And there's an acronym out there, Tim Woods. Those are the 7 wastes that lean manufacturing looks at. And it stands for transportation, inventory, materials, waiting around, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, and skills. And skills is lack of skills, meaning look at your people. There's people that have skills. Use them to your advantage within the company. And they will probably be the ones discovering some of the misses that you're having with your company. But if you look at those areas that you probably have some areas of improvement, then just continuously improve and chip away at those costs so it's more profitable for the company. And last but not least, Toyota has, you'd think I work for Toyota because I talk so much about it. I do not. I've never worked for Toyota, but there is a book out there that I read. There are 14 business principles, and I won't go over all of them. But the first one is think long term. Don't look at the quick fix. Quarterly earnings, that's a tough one with public companies, but just think long term with your company. Have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. And the last one is be a teaching organization. There's nothing worse than being a boss or seeing people that don't teach the people below them so that they can move onward and upward within the organization. So that's all I had, Dustin. I don't know if there's any other questions you had for me or if I hit them all for you and for all the people listening. I'm all ears to any other questions you may have.
Yeah, I think this is a great interview. These are the main questions I had for today.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, again, yeah, sure. You've got my link, profile, Rob Wolf, CLTD, CCP on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, concerns, feel free to hit me up.
Great. Thank you.